Hello and welcome to episode 54 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live streaming career as a radio presenter with one big regret. Never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. In this episode of the podcast, we dive into the albums of the best effing band in the world with author Shaun Hand, the man behind the book Pop Art Poems, The Music of the Jam. We kick off with the lead up to In the City and take a journey through to The Gift, hearing stories of discovery from Shaun along the way. So let's get into it. Shaun Hand, thanks for joining me.
Okay, no, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm looking forward to chatting about this. So Pop Art Poems, the Music of the Jam, your brilliant book that gives a really different and fresh perspective of this band that we love. So we're going to dig into this because it goes through the evolution of the band song by song, starting from stuff that In the City right through to that moment where we lost them forever, Beat Surrender and the goodbye from the band. First of all, I have to understand when this love of the Jam kicked in for you. What was it?
I think it developed when I was really young. I was into the Clash when I was about 7 through hearing a tape that my mum had. And so I got into listening to that on my little kind of bright red Walkman, you know. Then I remember my mum saying one day, she's like, oh, well, if you like the Clash, you'll like the Jam. And lo and behold, that Christmas, so this would be about 91, I got the Greatest Hits album that came out that year, the one with the black cover. Really got into that. Then my dad had all the original 45s. He bought them over, so I had them. It came very young. I don't know what it was about them, really. Been that long and they're that ingrained. I can't. They've just always been there, really.
So how old were you then?
I would have been seven.
Wow, right. Like 7 years old, discovering the music of the Jam. I love it.
Yeah. Although it was the early 90s, so I missed. I was born 84. Yeah, I think You're the Best Thing was in the top 10 the week I was born.
What was it about that music that connected with you? So why did it have such a big impact?
I don't know if you can define why when you're 7 years old or 8 years old. I keep finding new things in it or new angles to come at it from or something, or appreciate it in a different way. So there is a lot of depth to it. You might not say it sounds shallow, but you might not appreciate at first how much stuff is going on in there in terms of lyrics. And, as I got into playing music myself and understanding about how, music works and arrangements work, how intricate a lot of the stuff is for all its raw overall power. When you look at it, there's a lot going on in some song.
Ahead of putting this together and doing research with the book and looking into the songs and stuff, I realized that actually the Jam, in terms of studio albums and singles, is actually less than 4 hours of output.
Is it? Wow.
Which is...
I've not thought of it, yeah.
I think that's right. Yeah, because there's six LPs, which are all about half hour long. And then you've got obviously the singles that came outside of that. Pretty much less than 4. And then you think the legacy that these guys have left for 4 hours of material is incredible.
God knows how many times I've listened to that 4 hours. I've stretched that out into... I'd never thought of it in chronological, in those kind of terms,
Yeah, it's crazy. And when was it that you decided actually what I want to do is write a book about the Jam? How did that come about?
The idea was always floating around in my head somewhere from a very young age. The conscious start to it came in just after Christmas 2011, and I got sacked from a job. I let go from a job that I've been working on the night before Christmas Eve with 24 hours notice. So that was a fun Christmas. A couple of days later, I was, after Boxing Day, I was sat in bed with nothing to do. Was having just sort of drifting around on Google. Ended up finding some old Jam scans from Melody Maker or some NME that I'd never seen before, and thought, well, that'd be a good time to start the book. And then worked on and off on it for 3 or 4 years. Not every day, but there'd be, sort of a month where I do loads and then do nothing for 8 months.
It's the only book on the Jam where every single track is featured and you go into detail. So we cover everything from, right from, like I say before, In the City, but all the B-sides, all the songs. It's basically everything they recorded that you could dig up research on. So where do you start with that? How do you start digging into finding that information?
This is where I think subconsciously I was planning the book for a long time. So do you remember there was a book that came out called Sounds from the Street, I think it was called. Graham Wilmot, I think came out around 2003. I must have had, whatever year that came out, around then, So I would have been about 19. And I must have had the idea by then, because I remember being gutted when I saw the book that someone else had done it, So I must have been just stockpiling information for years. Obviously, once you've got, the box set, got extras and a few bootlegs, you've got the bulk of the material. And then as I was writing it, the deluxe editions came out, didn't they? But in terms of finding out about them, I don't know. A lot of it just obsessively reading every interview, every book you can find. Yeah, just picking up little bits here and there. And then just as I learned about music, analysing a bit, okay, the bass line does this, where the guitar does this, and that they work off each other in such and such a way. So I wanted to look at it in that way, but in a way that maybe people who weren't musicians could understand as well. Then if you are into that thing, you can get something from it as well.
One of the things I really liked was that obviously you're a massive fan of the Jam and they mean everything to you. But at the same time, you're looking at this and some of the stuff you're going, this is not their best material. You're at least coming in from the angle of not everything they did was perfect, which I liked. And some of the stuff you're kind of even a little critical of, which I think is good to kind of look through, because the thing that really tracks through is that evolution of this band and where they started from to where they ended up is a remarkable journey.
Oh, yeah. I mean, by anyone's stretch, and we're talking 5, 6 years. So imagine In the City had come out around the time of the Brexit referendum and The Gift was out now. Do you know what I mean? That's essentially the time period that they did all that in. Yeah, it's incredible. Most bands would put out 3 albums out now that sound broadly similar.
Yeah, that musical journey is incredible that they go on. And I was watching something with Noel Gallagher the other day, and he was talking about the fact that somebody pointed out to him that Nebworth only came 18 months after he last signed on to the Dole, which is, equally like an incredible journey. Let's dig into some of these songs and what they mean to you. So we're obviously going to start off with In the City, but I say that, but actually the book starts off a little earlier than that, right? We start off with Steve Brooks and Paul Weller and Dave Waller on rhythm guitar. And back in 1973, we start with Blueberry Rock and Some Kind of Lovin', and songs that maybe Jam fans won't know as the Jam that we know and love, because Bruce isn't there for a start. But you've dug right back into the evolution of how we got to In the City, which I think is nice.
Well, yeah, because that's how I wanted to make it as complete as possible. I mean, a lot of those songs are really interesting, and I was really interested when I read Steve Brooks's book. Again, just finding out little bits of information. There was like little scrawled set lists in there and lists of songs that they've covered or were trying to cover. And you've got to get from that to In the City. And it's 5 years. It's half the time the Jam were operating. Half of it was pre-Polydor. And some of the songs I'd heard on bootlegs, some turned up on YouTube around the time I was writing it. So, these songs that you would think were only 4 copies were locked in a vault and cost you thousands of pounds. You can just log on to YouTube and Making My Way Back Home's on YouTube, I think. Some Kind of Lovin' is as well, I think. Blueberry Rock, I did hear that at the exhibition 2016. So again, I was like listening to it on headphones. I was like desperately trying to remember what it sounded like. I was like, right, take note of this stuff.
Talking to Rick Buckley, he was talking about when he first joined the band, and I think Steve Brooks kind of said to him, here's a load of Chuck Berry LPs, go and learn these. I mean, that's what they were starting off doing, all these covers and that.
Yeah, and it is interesting that how far away, even at that point, they are from what's going on in the contemporary charts. I can't speak to it too much because I was minus 12. Even, you think glam rock and, prog and stuff. And there they are, they sound like the Everly Brothers and Beatles and referencing Chuck Berry and stuff.
So you started off with Greatest Hits, which is obviously a perfect introduction, and actually was my same introduction to the Jam.
Okay.
But when we go through this, let's talk about my album. So In the City, 1977, 12 tracks, 32 minutes. Art School, I changed my address. Slow Down, which was a cover. I Got By in Time, Away from the Numbers, the Batman theme. In the City, Sounds from the Street, Non-Stop Dancing, Time for Truth, Taking My Love, Bricks and Mortar. Bang, we're done. We're in and then we're out. 32 minutes. There was a lovely quote from Phil McNeil at the NME who said, Paul Weller's songwriting captures that entire teen frustration vibe with the melodic grace and dynamic aplomb of early Kinks and Who. What was it when you started digging into the research of In the City? What did you find, and what is it about that album that still stands up for you?
I liked it. I remember being really into it when I was a teenager. It's still got something that speaks to, young frustration and energy and anger there. What I found quite interesting looking in the songs that were written for it and the ones that didn't make it and stuff is a lot of it is, as much as, it's people say, oh, it's, The Who and Pete Townsend. There's a really big Dr. Feelgood R&B influence in there, because a lot of the songs in there were written as early as 75, something like that. They were just sped up for recording. Like if you hear some of the early demos, things like I Got Bite in Time sound completely different. Yeah, I don't know. Like I say, it's great debut album, just in and out. There are already multiple influences at play, although they are the ones that crop up a lot through Jam's career. Things like, The Who, Motown, Beatles, Dr. Feelgood. But of a little nicks, like I was always fascinated by how the end of Sounds from the Street is nicked from We Got to Get Out of This Place by the Animals. There's little references. It's R&B basically, isn't it? To a degree. You couldn't really call it punk rock, I don't think. Too sharp. There's too many other influences at play for that, I think.
The thing that's remarkable for me is 6 months later, there's another album. So The Modern World, which is often talked about as a flop and, would the Jam have survived? And actually, when I look at it, it went silver in the UK. It sold more copies than in the city. But again, 12 songs, 31 minutes. The Modern World, London Traffic, Standards, Life from a Window, The Combine, Don't Tell 'Em You're Sane. So we get Bruce Foxton writing songs here as well, which we'll come on to in a sec. In the Street Today, London Girl, I Need You for Someone, Here Comes the Weekend, Tonight at Noon, bang, In the Midnight Hour, we're done, the Wilson Pickett cover, we're in, we're out, 31 minutes again. I think that's a brilliant album, and there's a real mixed feeling in the Jam community, but we have to have that album to get to All Mod Cons, because you can still hear that evolution to me from the band.
Oh, totally. I think I say in the book, it's almost like a first draft of All Mod Cons in a way, because you get lines and themes in the Combine that pop up in the crowd. I think the line In the Crowd is just in the Combine. I don't think it suffers so much in terms of songwriting as production, and you can tell it's rushed. Some of it feels quite first takey. When you listen to the live versions from later on, from that Reading uni gig on Fire and Skill and bootlegged everywhere, things like Here Comes the Weekend and In the Street Today sound a lot better, because they've been playing them for 18 months by that point. So they're played in their tight and stuff. I really like it as well. I can always listen to it. But I still, I can't quite bring myself to like, say London Traffic. That really isn't, with the best will in the world, that's not one of the better songs. But then it's that thing where I've listened to them that many times that I almost don't have an opinion on it. Do you know what I mean? It's just there. It's just in the bloodstream. I Need You's great. Night at Noon, Light from a Window. I always loved the Combine as well. So
I got it on clear vinyl the other day, which is a new thing. It's not Polydor, and I can't remember what it is, but Standards is spelt with a T, as in Standards.
Standards. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, really? Come on now.
Yeah, I don't really go in for. I probably would if I had the money. Over the years, I've bought less and less of the reissues unless there's something new I'm going to get from it. So I'm just fortunate enough to have original copies of all the albums, although they're very battered from being taken out and played. But that's the whole point. Yeah, it's. I think that one, the artwork is really striking. Whatever you think of the music, on the front and the back, and the drawings inside. And before now, I've gone out with a jumper with arrows, gaffer taped onto my top and stuff. Like you say, you can't have All Mod Cons without that.
Let's get into All Mod Cons, because there's talk of this missing third album and this rejected album, if you like, by Polydor. Paul has to go away and rework it, and that then becomes All Mod Cons. That's not quite true from your research either, is it? And talking to I remember talking to Dennis Mundy on the podcast, and again, he was kind of, well, no, not really. I mean, the songs weren't good enough and Paul was sent away, but it's not like there's a bin of the Modern World's Part 2 going into All Mod Cons somewhere. It's like
no. I think I was quite surprised when I looked into it as much as I can, with no insider knowledge and no insider connections, just going by what I've read, how many of those songs are just All Mod Cons, early versions that just got rearranged, or got used, like A-Bomb, Water Street was part of that. The missing album, I think it amounts to about 3 or 4 songs, doesn't it? Where the titles are known. There's I Want to Paint, On Sunday Morning. There was one called She's Got Everything as well, which apparently has been bootlegged, but I've never been able to find it, which was recorded for News of the World. It's a fascinating area again. But from what I get is, because there's this whole thing that, Weller wasn't writing songs and he dried up and Bruce wrote all songs, but it seems like Weller was writing songs. It's just he wasn't writing particularly good ones. Or if he was, he just couldn't focus it enough until whoever it was said, no, you got to, this is shit, go away and rethink it. And you got to kick up the arse. Whether those things will ever surface, I don't know.
It's again a really quick turnaround, and you think with a band, you know, when you get to your debut album, the debut album is usually the songs that you've been playing live for a few years, and like you say, you've worked those in, they then sound great. Second album is always difficult, but the speed at which then the third album comes around, it's like, we need another one. Come on. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a bit where you're like, oh, I'm a bit stuck on ideas here, and particularly because they were on tour so much as well. It's like when they're finding the time. But hey, look, 12 songs. We're a little longer. This is 37 minutes, and there are some classics. I mean, All Mod Cons is a great way to open any album. To Be Someone, Didn't We Have a Nice Time is brilliant. Mr. Clean, David Watts, the Kinks cover, but then the not listed English Rose. And I love this idea that somebody can be listening to an album and suddenly this pops up and you're like, hold on, this isn't in the lyric sheet. This isn't listed. What the heck's this? and that is, I mean, still one of the all-time classics, one of my favorites of the Jam, and from Weller all the way through. English Rose is just a fabulous song. In the Crowd, Billy Hunt, It's Too Bad, Fly, The Place I Love, A-Bomb in Wardour Street you mentioned, and then we finish with Down in the Tube Station at Midnight. Bang, what a way to finish any LP. There's some great songs on that, aren't there?
Oh yeah, but that's their first classic, isn't it? And a lot of people, I think through the Facebook page I set up to promote the book, last year at some point I did a tournament, sort of what's everyone's favourite Weather album. I had like a knockout tournament. I mean, that finished high. It didn't actually win, which surprised me, but still number one in a lot of people's art. You can see why, just because it's scarily good when you consider, it was I think he turned 20 while they were writing it, while he was recording it, something like that. And yeah, English Rose great. I love The Place I Love, and It's Too Bad. All of it's great. It's one of those albums again. It's weird to stop and think about it, because you just I could stick it on I could stick it on backwards and probably sing along, And I'd get to hear the guitar and In the Crowd forwards as well. I did realise one thing I found when I was researching it was The Night, the B-side of Tube Station. That was nearly on it. That would have been like, the track that everyone skips and no one talks about.
There's no filler on that at all, is there? It's
No, it would be interesting to hear, because they were going to have excerpts of conversation between the tunes, weren't they? They went and recorded, I don't know if it was them chatting to some mods or they were just recording some mods talking amongst themselves, but they were going to have that interspersed between the tracks, which would have been interesting. But again, I don't know if it might have thrown it off balance, because it's very coherent.
It's got that lovely ebb and flow of an album, which I always think, and you don't really get so much these days with the world that we live in of MP3 and the drip feeding of tracks. And actually, I think Fat Pop is very much like this, where it needs to be experienced as an album. To me, those kind of things, and All Mod Cons, I think, is definitely like that as well. It's like it takes you really does take you on a journey from All Mod Cons right through to Tube Station, I think.
Yeah, which is the mark of a great album. If there are when you really think about it, even albums that you absolutely adore, there's always going to be a track where you might just skip, or you think, well, that's not as good as the others. All Mod Cons is one album where it's just solid all the way through it. Very hard to do, and it, like you say, timing. It's like that came out a year after This Is the Modern World, and they'd done a single and scrapped an album in between, and gone on tour at least twice.
I think my favourite album is the next one, Setting Suns, and I like all of us, I'm sure we kind of change our mind regularly, but the one, if I at the end of this chat, this will be the one I put on. So again, we're really punchy. We're 10 songs this time. We're 32 minutes, but songs like Girl on the Phone, Thick as Thieves, Private Hell, Little Boy Soldiers, Wasteland, and this idea initially of it kind of starting off as a concept album, and then that kind of getting binned off a little bit. But I'll continue the set list actually, because we do have a Bruce Foxton classic, Smithers Jones. That is a great song. Saturday's Kids, the Eton Rifles, and then the cover of Heatwave. And we'll talk about Bruce as well on this, because as you go through, you talk about Bruce Foxton's songwriting and the power of some of his songs, but this one really stacks up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I prefer the B-side version myself, the band version. But yeah, Setting Suns is, I realised when I was writing it, not writing Setting Suns, obviously, writing the book, that I think if Weller had seen the concept album thing through, and perhaps they hadn't rushed to meet the deadline, then I think it would have topped All Mod Cons, and it would be, how good it would have been is almost unthinkable. So if you look at the songs that are part of the concept, things like Wasteland, which is one of my favourite Jam songs, definitely my top 5, Burning Sky, Little Boy Soldiers, Thick as Thieves. If you imagine and Eating Rifles, if you imagine a whole album of that standard of lyricism, quality and playing and arrangements, then that would blow All Mod Cons out of the water. But such was the industry, I think, as well, because they were still in that mode of, the Beatles were expected to release 2 albums and 4 non-album singles every year, because this is only 10 years after Abbey Road, you know. I mean, when you think about it, I guess as we get further away in time, how close the late 60s and the late 70s are becomes apparent, you know. Sometimes it can seem like, you know, oh, well, it was the 60s and then 100 years later punk happened, and it didn't. There was, you know, it was 7 years between, you know, the end of the 60s and anarchy in the UK. So, but what I was saying was the industry was still in that mode where we want an album every Christmas and we want 3 or 4 singles and got a tour and stuff. So I can see why it might have been, oh, well, got to get this finished, you know, just, you know, anything will do. But then, you know, even when the Russians finish an album, you're coming up with stuff like Private Hell. You know what I mean? So,
chucking that in at the last minute is remarkable. Yeah, you're right about the 60s and 70s things are really interesting because that distance in time from Abbey Road to Setting Suns, because actually that's the same as 22 Dreams to True Meanings. I mean, you're right. It's no time at all, is it? And the same as Wake Up the Nation through to On Sunset. It's the same time period.
Yeah.
10 years, bang.
Can you say really that music has evolved? I mean, I don't think anyone would argue, obviously music's changed, but I don't think anyone would argue that music has changed at that kind of pace. But that's just the period of time it was set in, I guess. But yes, Setting Suns is, so yeah, I don't think it's as coherent as All My Cons for me, but when it's sort of, its highs are higher and its lows are lower. Do you know what I mean? Even though there isn't a bad song on there. Although I tend to sort of skip Heatwave, maybe.
I'll give you that. Also has their first top 10 hit, Eastern Rifles, which was such an important song for them. You know, it was the one where they were suddenly getting daytime airplay on breakfast airplay on Radio 1. They come out of John Peel. You know, they're mainstream.
That was one of my first favourites, if I remember rightly. And again, it's that thing where I was 21 when he wrote that, you know, and he came out with them lyrics, which is scary. You know?
I saw that live with the Stereophonics. I think played it with Weller. Okay. Kelly from the Stereophonics played it with Weller. And I don't know that I've seen him do it any other time.
I saw him 2009 and he did it. Saw him at Cannock Chase, sort of in between 22 Dreams and Wake Up the Nation.
That was brilliant. It's such a powerful song, isn't it?
Yeah. Some of the live footage of the Jam doing it is some of the best footage of them. You know, the thing where they're on Something Else, which in the Joy Division performance in itself is a classic one, but where they're doing Eaton Rifles, it's just incredible. And there's footage as well, a film it was called something else when it first came out, but it's on DVD as Punk in England, which came out in 1980, made by this German guy whose name escapes me. Footage of them playing Eaton Rifles, and I found out eventually it was filmed at Brighton in late 79 on the Setting Suns tour, because it's the same gig that is on the deluxe or the super deluxe Setting Suns. There's only a small clip that Weller's just off on one. He's just throwing the mic around and yelling rifles down the phone. Then he throws the microphone, he's slashing his guitar, and it's just incredible, intense.
Move on to 1980, and this album couldn't sound less like it lived in the 80s than, you know, if you think about that decade, really. The only Jam album to be co-produced by the band themselves, sound effects, 11 songs, 35 minutes, and Pretty Green is right up there for me as one of my favourite Jam songs. Brilliant. What a way to start an album. Monday, But I'm Different Now, Set the House Ablaze, Start is another great song. That's Entertainment, still gets played every week on radio stations in the UK. Dreamtime, Man in the Corner Shop, Music for the Last Couple, Boy About Town, and Scrape Away. Another great one. So what are your views on this one, and what did you find out?
This one was always my favourite growing up. I've come to the conclusion that I don't think I've got a favourite overall, but this one was always the one for me. Personally, I think some people would say, oh, Music for the Last Couple isn't that good or something, but I love everything on it. Particularly Monday is one of my all-time favourites, and I Scrape Away as well. Interested to find out at one point, I think it was going to be called Open Doors at one point. I think they told a fanzine that was what it was going to be called. And this was the one, didn't they suggest Godley and Cream write some songs for them because he was struggling to finish it?
I saw Paul had mentioned that on something recently where I think he'd phrased it as it was suggested that we cover 10cc. And that was how he'd phrased it in the interview. It might have been in Mojo magazine or something else recently, but obviously that wasn't the thing. It was actually, you know, could Godley and Cream write for the Jam, wasn't it?
Yeah, which, I mean, when if you think at the time they were, you know, getting quite sort of post-punk and angular, such a bizarre idea, but intriguing nonetheless. Famous thing about it is how different it sounds to Setting Suns, you know, quite anti-commercial in a way, you know, because if they just made their name with Going Underground and Eaton Rifles having these big, you know, guitar sounds, and then suddenly strip all that away and it's, you know, there's things that are just focus on the bass and the drums, and something like Scrape Away, that when you listen to the drum patterns, really quite unusual. This one and Setting Sun's. Rick Buckler's drumming's amazing on them. When you've listened to something 1,000 times and you're not bored of it, that's, to me, that's what signifies there's a lot of depth to the music and there's a lot going on. I think a lot of it on Setting Suns and sound effects is in how amazing the drumming is. Even if you're not a drummer, just the fact that there's so much going on, it's going to keep you coming back to it. You know, there's always something new to discover in there. You're like, oh, I never heard that little bit before. And the bass as well. And obviously the guitar and the singing, the lyrics are really good. I've always been fascinated by the talking bit in Set the House Ablaze that you can't quite hear. You know, at the end, because on the lyric sheet, only half of it's printed. But I found some software recently that supposedly separates songs out. So you put a song in and it'll split it into 4, it'll split into the drums, the guitar. You can supposedly hear everything individually, which works to an extent. But even I was really excited. I was like, finally, I can find out what he's talking about. And it's still just, it's all too buried.
Scrape Away is the one that's got the French through that loud halo thing at the end, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a fan, isn't it? Because I always thought on the lyric sheet, it says something like French by Laurent. Yeah, I thought he was some like old French poet. You know what I mean? And it turns out he was a French fan called Laurent who'd gone to the studio, was a fan, and was in the studio while they were doing Scrape Away. Weller goes to him, well, how do you say this in French? And he says, oh, you say it like this. He goes, oh, you record it then. And so that's, yeah, it's that French guy. That's one of the more advanced pieces of French I know.
I mean, two other things to talk about that I really like about the book as well is, so it's all the little nuggets of like where they recorded things. And the other thing that comes through is how long things lived in a set list. And quite often, some of the stuff wasn't there for long. Boom, one tour done, it's out. Because they're just moving through songs so quickly.
I've got to credit, there's a Smith's book, which I read years ago, called Songs That Saved Your Life, which is a similar thing to Song by Song. If you're into the Smiths and you've not read that, it's really worth a read. And it does a similar thing. It goes through where the songs came from, how they were written. But one of the things it did that I really liked was it did that. It said, oh, it was first played live here and last played live here. I really liked that idea, and it wasn't something I'd ever really looked at with the Jam. Looking into it, it was interesting how some songs that you think are so strong, like Dreamtime, which I think opened pretty much every sound effects store, and then never played it again as far as I can see. Whereas Scrape Away, even, you know, in mid-82 when, you know, Weller's was on his big soul boy kick, they're still playing something as angry as and angular as Scrape Away.
The thing for me as well that it shows you is because he continued to do that. So the other day, Ian Munn, the Style Council guru, shared a set list from 85 for the Style Council. They'd pretty much ditched everything from 83 and 84 for that tour. And Weller's still doing that now. You know, it's not like he's playing stuff from, or very rarely will play stuff from Wildwood, Stanley Road, Heavy Soul, that first solo album, all that stuff. It's like he's constantly looking forward all the time, isn't he? And that seems to have started out right from that very early Jam stage. Yeah,
well, he's always, I mean, I've never met him or anything, but strikes me as the sort of person who's always kind of in the now for the moment, which is great because, I mean, you can probably go and see, say, The Who or someone, and you know they're going to start with I Can't Explain, and, you know, they're going to play this and that. You know, I really like the fact that even if I went and saw Weller and he didn't play anything old, I like the fact that he's still been doing it this long and had so much success with so many songs in the past, and he's still, well, now I'm going to go out and play my new album. You know, even if I didn't particularly like his new album, for me, that's a really admirable thing to do, and, you know, true sort of mark of a true artist.
Now we have to close this off with 1982's The Gift, 11 songs, 32 minutes. Happy Together, Ghosts, which is Magic Mod's favourite song, and many other Jam fans. Precious, Just Who Is the 5 O'Clock Hero, Transglobal Express, Running on the Spot, Circus, which is a Bruce Foxton song, The Planet's Dream Goes Wrong, Carnation, Town Called Malice, and The Gift. Boom, 11 songs, 32 minutes. We're in, we're out, we're done.
Yeah, I think, personally for me, just to skip back a bit, one of my favourite periods of the Jam is 1981, when they didn't do an album. So I think that was even though they only did 2 singles, developmentally for Weller, it seems like it was a very important year because he was off, launched his record labels, responded to jamming, started popping up writing essays, becoming more politically active, and probably starting to grow away from the group, you know, the sort of the Jam thing. And you kind of hear, you know, you've got Funeral Pyre, followed, 3-4 months later by Absolute Beginners. And Tales from the Riverbank is my favourite Jam song as well. So I've got to get 81 minutes.
Fair points to pull me up on that, because you're right, because it's you can hear that bridge in those few months between what's coming. I mean, Absolute Beginners is an absolute corker. But again, Rick Buckler really key on that song.
Yeah, oh, totally. That's one where there's quite a few demos around. So you can really hear how that one and what became Tales from the Riverbank developed from We've Only Started, which is on extras. At one point, a couple of other versions did pop up briefly on the internet, and I managed to grab hold of, where you can hear Weller. There's like a disco section in one of them, and you can hear Weller trying to do, I'm assuming it's Weller doing the drums, trying to do like that kind of like disco vibe. And then it's interesting to hear how Rick Buckler comes in, and just by something as subtle as putting the kick drum or the bass drum in a slightly different place changes the whole outlook of the song. Yeah, and Tales from the Riverbank is just incredible. But only the B-side version. I'm not that keen on the re-recorded. But then you get onto the GIF, and I love the GIF. Yeah, I love everything on the first side. I've always been a big fan of Transglobe Express. I seem to really like the ones that no one else does, or that aren't generally, people's favourites. And again, I was really interested to find out what all the mumbling about is at the end. But he's having a go at Sting, isn't he?
Oh, is that what it is?
At the end, yeah. There's because if you listen, you can hear him talking, and it's a reference to Fleece's album Ghost in the Machine. Is it called Ghost in the Machine, the album?
Yeah.
I think that came out while they were recording. Doing some sort of Mickey take of Sting. He's saying like, oh yeah, I've had this idea for a riff, man. Yeah, we're all Ghost in the Machine, man. And then it's all, can't work out what he's saying. We can't change anything because we're so fucking weak or something like that. And it's some sort of like, political anti-Sting rant. I did at one point, that's it. I went on Wikipedia to see if it was mentioned on the Ghost in the Machine page, the Police album. It wasn't, so I put it there, and someone edited it back out. So probably Sting.
Yeah.
Checking up on himself. Running on the Spot's an incredible song as well.
Also for me, this period where, and you document it in the book as well, because you also feature who the other players are on these songs as well. And we should talk about two things, I think, actually. One, the fact that, I know this is the Paul Weller Fan podcast, but the Jam were Paul Weller, Bruce Foxton, Rick Buckler, and it needed the three of them to make that happen. That music came from the three of them, and Bruce and Rick added so much to that band, didn't they? Oh,
totally. Like I've been saying all along, it's the three of them, and there is this kind of school of thought that they were just sort of, it was all Weller, and they were just kind of bumbling sidekicks and stuff. But I think anyone who knows about music and how it's played, particularly drums and bass, would listen to what Bruce and Rick do and would say, Jesus, they were good. I could get into the technicalities of it, but it would get quite boring if you're not a guitarist or a bassist. But there are certain things that are going on that are, really advanced, and they're not just good because they're advanced. It's advanced and it works. It gives the songs a whole new dimension. And just the energy of their play, I think, you only have to look at them playing live to see, Bruce Foxton's just always just going for it.
I love hearing from Rick Buckler about that. We talked about that, and he was saying almost in a way it became dangerous, where every gig they tried to kind of, just put the pace up a little bit more. So the songs were, and you watch those live, that live footage, and it's, my God, it's so quick, it's so fast. I think these albums we talked about, if they did these albums, which are 30 minutes long, would have been done in about 15 minutes live.
True. Yeah, go back to like 77 footage. There's the one where they're playing at the Electric Circus in Manchester, and it's slowed down. They're playing, and Weller's singing or shouting that fast that you can't actually. He's just, I don't think he's actually saying words. It's But then even like the 82, there's the full gig, Bingley Hall, isn't there, in Birmingham, which is where I'm from, and I believe my mum and dad were at that gig.
Wow.
Certainly, pretty much anyone I've met who was in Birmingham at that time was at that gig. Again, just the passion and the intensity, especially when like running on the spot. They're just like, Weller's veins are like bulging out on his, and he's almost knocking the mic over because he's leaning into it so far. And that was a bad gig from what I can get, because Weller was just in a mark for most of it.
So I interrupted myself, but because I was saying what was really interesting is that you have the other players. So at this point in the gifts, we're having sax and trumpet, and you start hearing little bits of the sound that's to come for the Style Council later, I think.
Yeah, they're not actually sort of the end of the Jam and the beginning of Style Council aren't too dissimilar, because you've got that soul vibe coming in through the horns and the trumpets. Everyone was using them at that point, weren't they? Sort of I stumbled on a track by the Members, who seem to have still been going in 82, 83, and even they had like funk bass lines and horns. So yeah, they were kind of keeping up with the times, although they were going in a slightly different direction with it. It was really interesting. It was interesting to read somewhere that Keith Thomas, one of the people who plays on the two-man horn section, he said they were encouraged to like bring ideas to the songs as well. But like when they were working on Precious, they didn't just walk in and they weren't handed, sheet music and said, right, play this here, play this. They were encouraged to be part of it.
We should also talk about, there's still stuff to come after this album.
Yeah.
The Bitterest Pill I Have Ever Had to Swallow and Beat Surrender. Beat Surrender, which also featured a whole bunch of stuff as an EP, covers and all sorts.
What I was really interested to learn, and I learned this from Ian Munn's book, Mystical's Dream, was that Weller had effectively, he formed the Style Council by that point. What I can make out, they'd started rehearsing pretty much as soon as he got back from the tour where he decided he was going to break the jammer. I think by about August, September something. So, and they were working on Speak Like a Child, Money Go Round, possibly Head Start for Happiness. So he'd already written those songs and was already rehearsing them. Obviously, Solid Bond in Your Heart. Given that the Jam last single as an EP of covers, I don't know if he was just sort of
saving the good stuff.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think I love the Bitterest Pill. I love Shopping as well, and I think Shopping, given that there's again the sort of the school of thought, oh, Bruce and Rick, they couldn't play a certain style, like they played that kind of jazzy style really well, and so that pointed, they possibly could have, had they wanted to. I think they could have gone off into another direction, not necessarily Style Council direction, but they weren't just dunderheaded rock musicians. They were good and adaptable. I still think Weller did the right thing, and I'm really glad they've never got back together.
Post the Jam, you adore the Style Council. That's a huge thing for you too.
Oh, true. Yeah. Possibly as I've got older, since writing the book, maybe I got a bit jammed out by. I really came to appreciate the Style Council just in a different way. I don't think you can quantify it in terms of less or more. Personally, for me, if I had to pick a key Weller period, it would be probably 81 to 85, maybe. I think that's musically and stylistically and politically and everything. I think for me, that's just my favourite period of him, or his work to date. Who knows what could come. But I just think he looked dressed amazing, was, referencing amazing records and things like, our favourite shop cover I've spent God knows how long, squinting at, trying to read the books and listen to the albums and whatnot. I'm one of those people. I love Confessions of a Pop Group as well. I really like Weller I particularly like Weller when he's kicking against expectations. You know what I mean? Like when he does like free jazz EPs. That In Another Room EP did. I love that. 111 off 22 Dreams. I'm into all that stuff.
I got called out on the podcast by some of the listeners who were taking the piss about the fact that I congratulated Mick Talbot on Confessions 30 years later.
Yeah, it's first side. It's a very deep C, Changing the Guard, little piano bits. One of the things I taught myself to play piano, and one of the first things I taught myself to play was Dove Flew Down from the Elephant, that one. Little Boy in a Castle. Those two bits, I taught myself to play them. Not very well, but side one of Confessions is astounding. I've tried with The Cost of Loving. I just can't do it. Something doesn't click for me with it.
I have to ask you about Weller's Jukebox, because you talked about it, being a bit of a geek and kind of, really being obsessive about the creation of this book and stuff. Talk to me about this. We see lots of pictures of Black Barn Studio. We see this amazing jukebox at Black Barn Studio, which has Stanley Road artwork on it. So it's obviously existed for nearly 30 years, right? Every time you see pictures of it, you try to kind of zoom in and see what's on the actual jukebox, right? To the point that you've now created a playlist on Spotify, and you've worked out a shitload of the songs.
Oh no, I know all of them now. Because I've got inside connections. I'm telling you. I mean, it could have changed now, but what happened was I did spend years squinting trying to work them out. Some I haven't ruined my eyes. I don't know. Do you remember that Mojo Collections thing you did?
Yeah,
about 20 years ago with the record collection. I've had my mum's magnifying glass used for knitting. And I actually saw once, I went to Lawrence Watson, is the photographer who took that, and he had this random exhibition. This is about 15 years ago. He had a random exhibition on an estate, on the edge of a housing estate in Birmingham. And I went along and it had that picture of Weller sat in front of his record collection, like huge, filled the wall. And you could see what was written on every spine. But this was before camera phones. And I didn't know it was going to be there, so I didn't have a pen and paper. So I was just looking, trying to remember. Saw a Move album in there. Oh, something like the Brandenburg Concertos were in there as well. Something really, really diverse stuff. But back to the jukebox, I'd worked some of them out, and then I'd mentioned it to a friend of mine who works for, actually, I don't know if I'll get him stacked for being some sort of mole, but no, it'll be all right. There's a guy who I know who does camera for Lee Cogswell, the guy who's done all the recent Weller films. A mate of mine is one of his camera guys, and he says, I'm down there doing some filming next week. I'll take some photos of it for you. took photos of everything that was on there. So I got the whole lot,
Wow.
I wish I'd have known that before I started squinting. But
So the Spotify playlist, the complete Paul Weller Jukebox, is actually the Paul Weller Jukebox.
It's genuinely the complete Paul Weller Jukebox.
Wow, that is amazing. I didn't know
unless
that.
He might have, one had changed. There was, I guess stuff gets taken out. Yeah, Twisted Wheel, one had got taken out and something else put in. I was really surprised to see Embarrassment by Madness on there, because you don't really hear Weller ever talk about, in the early 80s, one thing he was, when he'd be raving about bands he was listening to at the time, in an interview in 1980 or 1981, he was raving about bands like Madness, The Beat, Slits, people like that. But then, because he spent so long totally disregarding that period and running away from it, you never hear him say, he'd always say, that's just other music from that period just hasn't dated well. So it's interesting to see that he still rates, or he's got a tune from that period on his jukebox.
Pop Art Poems is a fabulous book. At the minute, it's only a paperback copy, and bless you for sending me. When are you going to get it on Kindle?
As soon as I'm writing my second novel at the moment, and I'm meant to be doing that, I really do need to just go through it. I've got all the ISBN number and everything. I really just need to go through and edit it, because there's a few typos in there because I rush edited it, which is a long story. But you can only get the paperback if you keep an eye on eBay and someone's flogging theirs. Some people try and flog it for silly money.
And the title of the book's really important as well, because we haven't really touched on the words and the lyrics of Paul and the Jam, but they had such importance.
Yeah, well, they're my, as a writer myself, a lot of it, that was my kind of way in. And one of the things I think is, it certainly sets them apart from a lot of other bands, is the lyrics are so good and still are. And yeah, it was, I think originally, if it hadn't have been used, I'd have called it Sounds from the Street, because that's the obvious title. Pop Art Poems I was just casting around for a song title that would work as book title. But then once you hit on Pop Art Poems, it's like, well, that is what the songs are. When you can read the best of them. If you read the lyrics to Pretty Green, it's a pop art poem. And Pop Art Poem is another of those unusual songs that I'm a big fan of, that other people go, what the bloody hell's this stick going underground on, would you?
Shaun, this was so lovely. I have two final questions for you, right? You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. What are you going to go with?
I've got to go with Tales from the Riverbank, I think, because that would be one of my Desert Island bits anyway. But it has to be the Absolute Beginner's B-side version, not the one with the horns. That's to be the trippy fade-up version on those magical records I can just listen to over and over and over again.
And again, we talked about the albums, but the singles, the B-side songs like Butterfly Collector, you mentioned Shopping, Liza Radley, The Great Depression.
Oh,
there's so
Liza
much,
Radley, yeah.
Oh, there's so much stuff hidden away as well.
Yeah, that's another. And Liza Radley's another big favourite of mine. But I've got soft spot for B-sides like Aunties and Uncles. I think is underrated in the canon, the live version of Back in My Arms Again. I'm one of those people, I'll happily blast out Carnaby Street, and have a good, it's that thing I don't even know if I like it anymore. It's just there. It's just such a part of my life. It's like, actually I do like it. It's just one of those things occasionally. It's like, actually, no, son, it doesn't matter who wrote this or whether it's cool or not, or whether the lyrics to Carnaby Street are pretty atrocious, but just a great one to put out and blast out, But then you've got other things with, real depth, like the Butterfly Collector. You said Seesaw's an odd one. No one ever talks about Seesaw, the B-side of Eating Rifles.
Final question. Purpose of this podcast is to talk to lovely people like yourself, and really is to get that interview with Paul Weller that I never managed in my radio career. If and when it happens, what should I ask him?
I think I'd just ask him to recommend me some good music. I'd say I'd want to know, because I've met pretty much everyone you can meet around him without meeting him, and I don't know if I'd want to be honest. But just you don't want in case he was in a bad mood and you come away with a bad impression. But I met Mick Talbot at the festival I was playing at, and he turned up backstage and managed to become unstarstruck enough to ask him to recommend a really great jazz album. So I'd end up just asking something like that. So yeah, I just want to know what he's listening to.
He did a little bit on radio too, but I've always thought Weller would make a great radio DJ.
Oh yeah, he did that. I do love when he does curates, a playlist or does something. But those vinyl classic things were really interesting. I remember listening to them, taping them, and there was that one All Back to Mine that was meant to be on the telly, but it got scrapped and never broadcast. But it ended up being on radio, which he did in about '98, I think. Where it was just went round his house and was interviewing while he was playing records, and they were obviously high and drunk, I think. But he was just chatting about music and playing amazing tunes. But it was interesting because he was playing like 80s soul stuff, which at the time was about as unfashionable as it could get. Oh, you know what else I'd ask him, actually? But I'd probably ask him what his like musical guilty pleasure is. He's got like some really bizarre, uncool, mid-80s things, surely, you know what I mean?
I was thinking about this the other day. There must be some big mainstream songs that he likes, because everything seems really eclectic that he recommends, and you're like, it's a bit left field, or you're kind of like, oh, I've not heard this before. There must be. I just want to hear him go, yeah, I love this album by Phil Collins.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's one of my favourites. Here's something like that from him.
See, there was a thing, now you mentioned that, years ago, I think it was Channel 4 were doing one of those best albums ever programs, and the trailer for it that was being shown had people being interviewed for it, just saying, was Johnny Marr going, "Oh, the Queen is dead," and Weller popped up and he went, "ABBA's arrival." Now, I'm assuming he was taking the piss, but you never know. But I wouldn't put it past him. So he turned up. There's a clip of him. He turned up on a radio show praising Gilbert O'Sullivan, saying that "Alone Again" naturally was one of his all-time favourite songs. So,
Shaun, thank you so much for your time. This was an absolute blast. Well done on the book, man, and thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for having me, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
That was great. My thanks once again to Shaun Hand. Do try to track down his book on eBay, and I'll let you know when that Kindle version arrives in the future. And check out my show notes for links to that Weller Jukebox too, and ways to connect with Shaun. Next up, a real delight to chat with a guest who was on my list from the very beginning, not least because I'm a huge fan of her fabulous work. Singer-songwriter Sam Brown joins me on the podcast. We dive into her career and hear about links to Paul through live music and the Studio 150 album that features Sam as well. Make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review, it really does help us to find new listeners, and please do share on your social media channels. You can also buy me a coffee and find information about my guests in the show notes for this podcast. Get in touch on Twitter @WellerFanPod or on Instagram and Facebook, it's Paul Weller Fan Podcast. I'll see you next time.